Does this look like you? Well, I'm here to tell you that productivity does not have to be painful. Today, I'm going to be talking about Ali Abdaal's new book, Feel Good Productivity, which just came out a few days ago, and I managed to get my hands on the book right when it came out so that I could read it in just a few days' time so that you guys don't have to, because I know you guys are very busy. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys the main takeaways and tips that I got from each section of the book that I found to be the most helpful for me personally, and things that I feel like I haven't heard before. At the end of the video, I'm also going to be sharing my candid thoughts on the book in general, which includes some brutal honesty. Sorry, Ali, if you're watching this. So you guys could decide for yourself whether it's worth buying and reading the full book. So make sure you stick around to the end. So Feel Good Productivity is split into 3 sections with 3 chapters each. The first part is called Energize, which is all about finding ways and hacks to make productivity more energizing and more exciting, especially when it comes to tasks that we don't feel like we want to do. The second part of the book is called Unblock, in which he talks about ways to beat procrastination and any other blockers that are standing in the way of you getting a task done. And then the third part is called Sustain, which is all about finding ways to sustain your productivity streak. So making sure that whatever habit you build is actually something that you carry into your life long term. So now let's dive into the first part, Energize. So the first chapter in the section is called Play. This part is all about figuring out ways to incorporate play into our everyday lives, especially when we're trying to be productive. Now, the main idea here is that as we grow up and as we go through all these institutions from school to work, we're not encouraged to play anymore. Instead, productivity is seen as the antithesis of play because play is seen as a waste of time. So how could we bring back our inner child and rejuvenate the tasks that feel so draining to us? Well, the answer is play. Now, one really interesting way to figure out how to incorporate play into your everyday work is to first figure out what your play personality is. So in the book, Ali actually provides 8 different types of play personalities that you could diagnose yourself as. So the first one is the collector. It's someone who loves to gather and organize, such as doing things like searching for rare plants or going around garage sales to look for a certain unique item. The second personality is the competitor, who enjoys games and sports and takes pleasure in trying their best and winning. And then the third is the explorer, who likes to wander, discover new places and things they've never seen through hiking, road tripping, and other adventures. And then the fourth is the creator, who finds joy in making things and can just spend hours in the flow, painting, gardening, doing music, any of those things. The fifth personality is the storyteller, who is able to have an active imagination and uses it to entertain other people. They're drawn to things like role-playing and writing and theater. The sixth personality is the joker. You could imagine this as the kid who's the class clown, who loves to make people laugh and love to do stand-up, improv, just any sort of comedic things. The seventh play personality is the director, who likes to plan and organize and lead others. So even if you're playing a silly little dress-up game, they still like to lead others around and direct people to do things. The eighth play personality is the kinesthetic, who likes to play by engaging in physical activities such as running, gymnastics, acrobatics, sports, anything like that. So the idea here is to look at each of these 8 different play personalities and reflect on which one resonates the most with you when you think back to your childhood. And then based on that personality, you can find similar activities that incorporate this playfulness into your everyday work. So for example, if you're the Joker and you have to work on a super boring presentation at work, you could find ways to incorporate small jokes into the course of the presentation, whether it's including something like a hidden Easter egg in a slide or cracking a little joke at the beginning of the presentation to make others laugh. Then when you're crafting the presentation, you'll feel a lot more energized because it's fun to you. Another method for incorporating play into your everyday work is to be curious. So you might be wondering, how do you just be curious, especially when it comes to a super boring task? Well, the idea here is to take side quests. So for example, on your to-do list, you might have to draft up a business report for your company to sum up the statistics for the past quarter's performance. Now, you might not be actually interested in the company's performance, but let's say while you're drafting up the report, you find that there has been a huge uptick in online shopping recently. Now, if you're curious, you might be wondering what exactly is driving that online shopping behavior. Just out of your own personal curiosity's sake, you would then go down a little rabbit hole to just understand those drivers. And then the work just comes along so much easier to create that report in the end. So in everything you do, try to find little nuggets of information that spark your curiosity and then go after them as little side quests. Of course, don't let the side quests take away from the main work of doing that main task. But if you allow yourself a few minutes to indulge in these side quests, then you will find the overall work process to be much more enjoyable. Another quick way to figure out how to incorporate play is to just simply ask yourself, what would this task look like if it were fun? For example, you might have a to-do on your list to go to the gym, but today you really don't feel like going to the gym. Well, one way to make you more motivated to go and to energize you is perhaps you really like listening to music and you haven't really found time throughout your day to listen to your favorite playlist. Well, now is the perfect time to pop on those headphones while also simultaneously doing the task that you dread, going to the gym. And in that way, you're able to convince yourself to do a task that you might find boring or tedious while doing something enjoyable. And then finally, the biggest takeaway or tip for me from this chapter on play is basically a mindset shift. So the advice here is to be sincere, but not too serious. So what exactly does this mean? Let's say you have a big goal to start a YouTube channel. So what being sincere but not serious means is that you're sincere in putting in an honest and consistent effort in creating YouTube videos, but then you don't want to be too serious in that every time you decide to make a video, you feel a lot of fear and anxiety about how the video is going to perform, whether people are going to judge you. Essentially raising the stakes of failure way too high. You want to approach this new goal with the sense that even if you fail, it doesn't really matter. What's the worst that could happen from failing? You want to make sure you put in enough effort, but also don't fixate too much on the outcomes of the effort. This really hit home for me personally because as a perfectionist, I want to make sure that every piece of work I put out is something that is up to my standards. But because of this might actually prevent me from making consistent progress. And so what I should really be thinking is that as long as I put in an effort, the outcome is not as important. Failure doesn't mean the end of the world. So in this way, we normalize failure. The second chapter of the Energize section is called Power. And there's a really interesting idea that this chapter starts off with. He says, feeling confidence about your ability to do something not only makes you feel better when you're doing it, but it actually makes you perform better at the task. So believing in yourself is actually the first step you could take to make sure that you could actually do it. Now, the first tip of how you could gain more power while being productive is to first immerse yourself in something called vicarious mastery. So the idea of vicarious mastery is that you surround yourself with people like you who have accomplished the thing that you are striving to do. So for example, if I wanted to be a lifestyle creator, even if I don't have any friends who are successful lifestyle creators, I could actively choose to subscribe to my favorite lifestyle creators and watch them succeed at what I want to do. By constantly seeing their success, it makes your brain think that you could also achieve that success because they don't seem that different from you. One caveat here is that it's a fine line between admiring people for what they've achieved versus being envious of what they have. So a lot of times I feel like if you're not conscious of what your goal is by looking at other people like you who've achieved what you want, it could quickly turn into jealousy and resentment for why haven't you achieved what they've achieved. So just be very conscious of the purpose of following and surrounding yourselves with these people. And then the second tip here is to learn by doing. So this idea is actually very similar to something else that I read in Atomic Habits by James Clear, which is also an amazing book, by the way. But essentially, by just consistently engaging in something, even if you're bad at it, you're telling yourself that you are gaining skills and knowledge by doing this all the time. You're implicitly telling your brain that every time you do this, you're gaining more experience, you're gaining more skills, and essentially confidence in your ability to do the thing. Every time you show up for this thing, you're putting in a vote of confidence, according to the language of Atomic Habits. And according to this book, you're learning by doing. Another tip in this book to empower yourself when you're trying to be productive is to think like a beginner. By thinking like a beginner, you're basically going back to the beginning stages where you don't know anything. You're not biased by your experience. And you could feel more powerful by teaching someone else who's a beginner the skills to your trade. By doing so, you're not only deepening your mastery of that craft, but you're gaining confidence that you could pass on the knowledge to someone else who knows absolutely nothing. And the biggest takeaway for me here from this chapter is to take ownership of the process. So what does this mean? It means taking ownership of your own choices and actions when it comes to productivity. Even if you can't control what you need to accomplish, such as writing a report for work, you could control how you choose to go about it. Remember incorporating things like play, building confidence through showing up every time. These are the things that you could choose to do in the process of creating that report. And then not only can you control the process, but you can also own your mindset during the process. So instead of saying, I have to do something, a simple trick is just to say, I get to do this. And then immediately you feel a lot more gratitude for this opportunity to deepen your skills and to be productive. Even if you are actually forced to do something, if you just think that you get to do it instead of having to do it, you'll implicitly want to do it more. The third chapter of this section is people. And this section, I actually found only a couple of takeaways that I found helpful. The first one is to join a community where you could immerse yourself in the scenius. So like genius, but in a scene of people. The idea here is that if you work synchronously or asynchronously with a group of other people who are working towards a common goal, you'll actually motivate yourself to work more productively. Some examples of this could be like a writer's group where you just meet online to write a chapter of your next book together. Even though you guys aren't writing about the same topics, just being with other people who are also engaging in writing will make you more focused and motivated. Another example of this is finding an accountability partner who's able to track progress with you and make sure that you stick to your habit that you want to form. This is creating essentially artificial social pressure where if you don't stick to a habit, you will feel like you're letting down someone else, which will then motivate you to continue doing whatever you set out to do. And then the second tip here is more for people who's leading a team. And I think his idea here is that if you engage in these communication tips, you will be more productive as a leader. When you're giving feedback, over communicate the good stuff, but then also be candid about sharing the bad stuff. So be direct, be honest, and to the point, and don't shy away from the bad stuff, but first talk a lot about the good points. I personally didn't find this that helpful since I haven't been managing a team at work or leading people on a team. So this chapter was probably the least relevant for me, and I'll touch on that at the end of the video. All right, now this brings us to the second part of the book, which is named Unblock. So there are 3 parts to this section as well, and the first one is seek clarity. So first, you have to be really clear about your goal and why you are trying to achieve that goal. So Ali Abdaal starts off the chapter with a hot take, and essentially it's that motivation and discipline don't work. So for the motivational piece, a lot of people have motivation to achieve a lot of dreams that they have. But the problem is some of them actually can't because of things that might come up in their lives. So for example, maybe a parent wants to start a hobby of gardening, but they don't have the time when their newborns are constantly demanding their attention 24/7. This motivation can't really get them anywhere towards their goal. In the book, he says that discipline is a little bit better than motivation in terms of getting people to achieve their goals, but it's still not perfect because discipline means taking action despite how unmotivated you are. So for example, going to the gym when you're feeling lazy and would rather lie on the couch like a bum. But discipline doesn't really work well in the long term because it's not very enjoyable. It's a very grueling process where you're just grinding away to get towards your goal. And this could lead to a lot of burnout. The method that he proposes is the Unblock method. And the idea here is to ask yourself, what is blocking me from doing this thing? And he says the number 1 blocker is usually uncertainty paralysis. This is when you feel overwhelmed by the unknowns or the complexity of a situation, which is caused by overestimating what's at stake here. So again, going to the previous section where we talked about how in order to feel playful, you have to lower the stakes of failure. Here, these stakes are stopping you from actually committing to a task. To fix this, you have to understand your ultimate why or your purpose for doing this. To really get at that ultimate purpose, one method to do this is to ask yourself the 5 whys. So there might be a surface level reason for you to start a YouTube channel, such as gaining clout or gaining viewers. But then if you keep asking why, it's gonna go deeper and deeper into the inner reason why you want to do something. And this works really well for deciding whether to commit to a project. So if someone asks you to take on an additional project, first ask why 5 times to get at whether it ties to your ultimate purpose and goal for the year. Another interesting idea here is that instead of setting SMART goals, he actually advises beginners or people who are blocked by procrastination to set NICE goals. So NICE goals are essentially near-term, input-based, controllable, and energizing goals. This means if you're trying to lose 10 pounds by the end of the year, your initial goal might be to lose 1 pound by the end of the month by going to the gym for 5 times a week. A NICE goal would be something that's more near-term, more controllable by being very limited in scope, and very focused on your input. So a NICE goal might be going to the gym for 30 minutes for 3 days the next week to do whatever exercise you want. In that way, you know exactly when you're going to be doing this goal. It's very input based because you're deciding what exactly you're putting into the process. And then it's controllable because it's a manageable amount of time. And it's energizing because you get to choose what sorts of workouts you want to work on. So that also increases your power in productivity. And that way you're less focused on the output of the goal, which is losing a pound every month, to focusing on the input, which is going to the gym in the next week for 3 days a week. And I really like the idea of that because I feel like human brains can't really focus in on long-term goals as well as they can on short-term goals. And if you could somehow condense those long-term goals into very manageable short-term goals, then you have something golden. The second chapter of this section is called finding courage. His main idea here is that procrastination stems from fear. And one way to move past that fear is to first acknowledge that what's stopping you from doing this thing is fear. And he talks about this study where there's two groups of people who are deathly afraid of spiders, who are asked to approach a giant tarantula at the end of the study and touch it. And one group is told to write down what their fears are and why. And then another group is just told to approach it with no prior exercise. And the group that was able to write down their fears actually felt less fear after touching the tarantula than the group that didn't write down those fears. So this is really interesting to me, not only because I'm also afraid of spiders, but the fact that I never really thought about how procrastination might actually come from fear. I've always assumed that procrastination is coming from a lack of energy. But how many times have you encountered a situation where you finally get the resolve to do something and then it only took 5 minutes and it was way easier than you thought it would be? I've certainly experienced a lot of that. So besides acknowledging that fear is stopping you from making progress on your goal, what are some other ways in which you could move past the fear? One way is to do the 10-10-10 trick. So what the 10-10-10 trick entails is you could ask yourself, will this matter in 10 days or in 10 weeks and then in 10 years? Now, I find that this trick is really helpful because you'll rarely find something that still matters in the grand scheme of things in 10 years time. For example, let's say you majorly mess up a presentation at work. So in 10 days, maybe your manager will still remember that time you messed up super badly. But in 10 weeks, maybe there's like a faint recollection of the time you did that, but people have moved on already. And then in 10 years, even you yourself won't remember that one mistake because over the course of your 10-year career, I'm sure there's other similar mistakes that you've made, and then with each time, it gets less and less embarrassing. This is a really good way to lower the stakes of failure. So by thinking about it in that way, you're less scared of trying to make progress towards that goal. Another way to get past the fear is to overcome something called the spotlight effect. So the spotlight effect essentially says that people think they're in the spotlight more than they actually are. Like, people think that people are always watching them, judging them for their every action, when really people are more concerned with themselves than they are with you. So going back to the presentation example, it might also be the case that you think you majorly messed up, but nobody else even noticed your blunder because they're so hyper fixated on their part of the presentation. I think it's super liberating to just know that nobody really cares about you. Even though that statement by itself is kind of sad without context, when you're talking about things like trying something outside of your comfort zone, I think that knowing that nobody cares is actually so liberating because now you know that you could fail and it doesn't really matter. The third part of the second section of this book, which is all about unblocking yourself, is about getting started. So the main idea here is that there's this thing called inertia, where an object at rest stays at rest, but an object in motion stays in motion. In the context of productivity, inertia may stop us from getting started on a new goal or something that we know we really should be doing. But a way to beat inertia is to actually change the environment around us, to prompt us to get started with a lower activation threshold. You see, the higher activation threshold, which is how much energy it takes to get yourself to get moving, the less likely we are to do that thing. So by changing our environment, we're actually making it easier for ourselves to start doing the thing consistently. So there's a couple of great tips in this part of the book. One way to get yourself to start on something is to just make a goal to do something for 5 minutes every day. This is a tip that I've seen in various productivity channels. I remember reading about it in Atomic Habits, hearing about it on Veritasium's channel for New Year's resolutions, and I really think that this is a great tip. So for myself, I think there's a huge sense of inertia when I begin a YouTube video. So recently, I've been just doing small things on the days where I don't really feel like doing anything for YouTube. So for example, yesterday I just took out my camera and set it up and started playing with some of the different modes and effects on the camera. And even though that didn't really accomplish what I really need to do, which is making the YouTube video, I think by doing that, today I am more likely to actually open up the camera and start filming my YouTube video. So essentially, I just primed myself to think that it is easier to start this project that I've been putting off. Because somehow, by interacting with elements of the project, even for 5 minutes a day, it bridges the mental gap for me between not having started at all to seeming like I'm already on my way to complete the project. And that really works for me. And then the second tip that I really like from this section of the book is to track your progress every day for something that you are trying to do long term. So for example, let's say you're trying to write a book and the book might not be published in a year or more. So a lot of people lose motivation because they feel like whatever they're doing today isn't really making a dent in this giant pile of work to complete the book. But if you start tracking your progress every day, then you actually feel a greater sense of accomplishment, because these small gains every day are very hard for our minds to remember. But in the grand scheme of things, they really add up to a lot of progress. This year, I decided to start tracking my progress for YouTube videos and also my personal daily and weekly habit goals in a new planner that I got, which includes a Gantt chart where you could cross off every single day for every task that you want to track and see just how often you're repeating that task. It's a way to hold yourself accountable for the daily habits that you want to build. And even though it's been a few days since I started it this year, it's been really helpful to just have that visual reminder on my desk to complete those tasks. The third part of this book is called Sustain, which is all about finding ways to sustain your productivity in the long term. Because if you don't have a sustainable process, even if you're productive for a week, it doesn't really create any long-lasting change in your life. It's only when you begin creating habits over a longer period of time in which you see significant change. So this part of the book is divided into 3 sections based on 3 different types of burnout. And these 3 types of burnout are overexertion burnout, depletion burnout, and misalignment burnout. So the first part of this section is conserve. This is all about finding ways to prevent overexertion burnout, which is defined as doing too many things at once. You know, when you start a new year and you commit to a whole long list of New Year's resolutions, and then after a month, you've actually made progress on none of them because there's just so many that you are trying to achieve, and it all seems too overwhelming. Well, I've definitely experienced that for the last few years. I was very ambitious at the beginning of the new year, and I set a long list of goals that I wrote in my journal. But when you're trying to build a habit, having so many things on the list actually diffracts your attention away from each individual thing. So Ali offers 3 tips to prevent overexertion burnout. The first one is to only say yes to a commitment if it matches 2 criteria. Let's say the commitment is a few months away. Pretend in your head that this commitment is actually tomorrow. So would you be okay with having that in your schedule tomorrow? If not, then do not agree to it. A lot of us look at our calendars 6 months away and see that it's empty. And because of that, we think that we have all this free time in the future for whatever commitment people ask of us. But as you approach that 6-month mark, inevitably there's things that will fill up the time, but we're really bad at planning ahead for those things that come up. So I think this trick of looking at tomorrow's schedule is a really great way to understand just how full your everyday schedule might be. Another way to decide whether to commit to something long-term is really thinking about how it makes you feel. Is this something that you could respond to with a heck yes? Or, yeah, it sounds kind of fun, but I'm just not sure. If it's not a heck yes, then default to a no, and this will save you so much time in the future. Doing this will keep you disciplined to your real goals, what truly matters to you. Because if those commitments aren't truly aligned with your goals, then you probably don't need to be doing them. And just say no for the sake of your future self, so you have more time to work towards what you truly want. And the third tip here is to schedule in breaks. So when you're doing too many things at the same time, it's very overwhelming and you'll quickly burn out. But if you just schedule in a 10-minute, 15-minute break in between all these things that you're doing, it actually allows you to rejuvenate. Giving yourself rest in between can allow you to focus for longer. This kind of ties into the next part of this section, which is called recharge. And recharge is all about finding ways to prevent depletion burnout, where you're just working too hard without any rest. Again, there's 3 tips here that Ali gives. The first one is to find a calm hobby that will allow you to recharge. And calm, you guessed it, is an acronym for calm, automated, liberated, and mellow. This kind of hobby is very low stakes, and you don't want any external reward to be attached to it. So for example, let's say your goal is to write a book. A calm hobby might be something that's completely unrelated to that goal, like painting a canvas or writing a card for someone. It's something that you feel fairly competent in doing. It's autonomous and liberated in that you could make your own decisions and express your creativity through this hobby. And it's mellow because it doesn't cause stress. It's not like you're painting to make a living or writing a card to impress someone. It's something that calms you down and makes you feel at peace, thus recharging your energy. The second tip here is to spend time in nature. Or if you aren't able to go outside and walk in nature, just having some greenery around you to simply look at, whether it's outside your window or just having a plant in your house. In the book, there's a lot of evidence that just being around nature makes you feel a lot more grounded and mindful of the present, which then helps prevent depletion burnout. The third tip here is the write-off principle. So have you ever had a day where you get back from work and you just feel super tired that particular day for whatever reason, but you really know that you should be making consistent daily progress towards one of your goals, and you feel really guilty if you miss that day? And the idea of the write-off principle is that sometimes it is okay to just completely write off the day and take that moment intentionally to recharge. It's actually really funny because I saw in an interview with Ali that he said that he just completely made up this write-off principle because it sounds foreign and sophisticated, when really he just changed the spelling of the word write-off to turn it into write-off. So then people think it's a real principle. But regardless, I think this is actually a great tip because I remember in college, every time I wasn't studying and I was hanging out with my friends, I would feel really anxious and guilty for spending even an hour or two just chilling and hanging out with people instead of working towards the never-ending assignments that I had. But in hindsight, that was really unhealthy because it makes me feel like I'm never off, because I'm always thinking in the back of my mind about all the work I have left. So I'm never really relaxing and being in the moment. And thus, I'm not really recharging even when I'm spending time away from my work. Another tip to conserve energy is to first remove your distractions from your environment. And then if you do get distracted, which is inevitably gonna happen, allow yourself to restart the day after. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard the advice to remove distractions, but I think the second part of this is what's really important, which is that when you do fail and you do get distracted, don't fail without abandon. Don't get into this mental spiral where you're like, oh, I already cheated for this day. I already ate that donut. So now I might as well just cheat my diet for the entire week because I already broke the daily habit that I was trying to build. No, these habits are not rigid. You can get back on track whenever you feel like it. And the more you think that you have to be perfect in following these daily habits or goals, the less likely you are to stick to it. Because we're all human. So none of us are going to be perfect. And we have to build in some slack for us to mess up once in a while. And that slack is that it's okay, but we have to get back on track once we fail. I think the third part of this section, called Align, is the most interesting. Basically, this is talking about ways to avoid misalignment burnout. And I think this type of burnout is the sneakiest. So the thesis here is that a lot of people burn out or lose motivation for something because there's a core misalignment with their values and why they're doing something. And here he defines several different types of motivation, and it's arranged in a spectrum between internal and external motivation. So external motivation is based on what people think about you and what people perceive of you, and that's what's driving you to act towards something. Now, internal motivation is that you're doing something solely for yourself. You don't care what other people think, and whatever goal you're working towards is for your own benefit. The first type, introjected motivation, is that you feel guilty or bad about yourself if you don't do something. So kind of acting like your own internal critic. Identified motivation, on the other hand, is acting in alignment with one of your core values. This is the only type of motivation that will make you happier while you're working towards that goal. In order to truly have identified motivation, you have to understand what is meaningful to you to live a life that is fulfilling and purposeful. And then after you figure that out, then you could figure out what behaviors to do to align yourselves with those goals. Now, you might be wondering, how do I figure out for myself what matters to me and what a meaningful life means to me? And there's a few fun exercises in the book to figure this out. The first one is the eulogy method, which is kind of morbid, but think about when you die and all your friends and family are gathered at your funeral. What would be in their eulogies of you? Would you want to be remembered for working really hard and earning lots of money? Or would you rather be remembered as a great father or mother or sister or brother? Would you want to be remembered for someone who's ambitious and driven, or someone who's loving and kind and thoughtful? There's not really a right answer here, but really reflect on what you want your legacy to be. And then that gives you a guidepost for what actions to take going forward to live a meaningful life. The second tip here is to do something called an Odyssey plan. This idea actually comes from this book called Design Your Life by two Stanford professors who work at the design school. And I actually read this book before I read Ali's book, and I am a huge fan of this tip. So basically how this works is that you want to build 3 different 5-year plans. Each of these 5-year plans should include what you think your future will look like for every single year in terms of different categories of your life, whether it's career, family, relationships, or health. And the first plan that you want to write out is your current path. So let's say you stick with whatever you're doing right now and think about where that would lead you in 5 years. Maybe you climb up the ladder to become a manager or director of your corporate job. Maybe with your current partner, you become married and have kids. Now for the second plan, think about an alternative path. What is the next most likely thing that you would do if you wanted to change things up? So let's say the second alternative path is that you want to choose a different career, something that you've always been thinking about trying, but didn't really take action to look into it. What would that future look like 5 years down the line? And again, make sure to plot out what you think would happen every single year leading up to that 5-year mark. And then the last plan, which I think is the most fun plan to plan out, is the radical path. So if money was not an issue, what would be your dream life in 5 years? So let's say a crazy dream of yours is to become a chef, even though right now you're an accountant. It's fine if it's so completely off the beaten path and seems completely impossible and ridiculous, because you want to go wild with this one. What would your life look like in 5 years if you did that? And then after creating all 3 of these plans, you could put them side by side and see where these paths lead you in 5 years? Which of the 5-year destinations do you think is the most meaningful and the most fulfilling to you? And for the radical path, you might be thinking, I'm actually never going to do this thing. But the idea is to open your mind up to new possibilities. Even if you don't take the radical path exactly, if you like where it ends up, then you might start exploring things that are adjacent to it, or doing little things that dip your feet into something that's similar to the radical path. And it'll lead you towards your dream destination that has some core tenets of that radical path. I find that this exercise is really great for people who think that they're stuck in life, who don't have many options left anymore because they're too set in their careers, they're bound by families, mortgages, things like that. When you plan out these 3 different paths, you realize that there's tons of possibilities for you to explore, even within the confines of your current life. I highly recommend trying this and reading the book where this idea was sourced from, Design Your Life. And then the third tip I really liked from this part of the book is something called a 12-month celebration. In a way, it's kind of like the opposite of the eulogy exercise because it's short-term and it's a more positive thing compared to the eulogy. And the idea of the 12-month celebration is this. Pretend you're catching up with a close friend at the end of the year and sharing what progress you've made on your goals. Where exactly would you like to be with those goals at the end of the 12 months? This to me is sort of like manifesting, but it makes it more tangible because you could see yourself celebrating achieving it, not just passing some sort of unknown milestone and not really seeing anything concrete from it. So for example, if you're looking to lose 10 pounds by the end of the next 12 months, that could be really hard to visualize in your head unless you think about it in the context of a celebration with your friends. Imagine showing up to dinner with your friend and just announcing with excitement how you've come so far with this fitness journey, and you easily drop those 10 pounds. Now that is a motivating visualization. And you can repeat this exercise for any goals that you want to set for the next year. All right, now that I've summarized the book, I wanted to give my overall opinions of the book and let you guys know whether I think it's worth it for you guys to buy the book and read it entirely. So I want to start off with the pros. The language itself is very concise and easy to read, so it's accessible to a wide range of audiences, no matter what age you are. I also really like that there's a lot of different exercises to try out at the end of each chapter. I think there's like 6 to try for each chapter, which makes it easier to connect what you just learned conceptually to changes you can make in your own life to try them out. Finally, I think it puts a refreshing spin on productivity that I haven't heard mentioned before in other YouTube channels or in other productivity books that I've read. It really emphasizes thinking about how you feel during the process of being productive. And the whole idea here is that not only does it make you more productive, it makes that productivity more sustainable. And I think that's a win. Now on to the cons. So I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of different experiments to try at the end of each chapter to integrate what you've learned into your own life. However, I found that each experiment only took up a page or 2 and didn't really go into depth of how you actually implement them. Like logistically and practically, what are each of the steps that you need to take in order to carry out the experiment? I wish it gave more details and instructions on how to do this, but instead it's very high level and still pretty conceptual in my opinion. For example, when I talked about the Odyssey plan in this video, those tips were actually taken a lot from my own knowledge of reading the book in which the idea was sourced, Design Your Life. Ali didn't actually mention how exactly you write out those 3-year plans and what specific insights you could derive from doing those plans. And I think that prevents readers from getting the full value out of these experiments if they don't incorporate it correctly. My second critique of this book is that I feel like he jumps from study to study without really giving a lot of personal anecdotes of how this relates to his personal experience and what he learned from it. I mean, sure, sometimes he gives some general examples of how he wants to learn guitar or when he was a doctor, but it didn't really feel like there was a personal connection to each of these tips. Like, I wasn't really convinced that these tips really drove a long-term change in his life and habits. And I wish he went deeper with some personal stories to really illustrate how these experiments changed his life. At the end of the book, I feel like I still didn't really know him as a person, but it just felt like he was some sort of narrator who was presenting these studies to me. Sorry, Ellie, I'm a huge fan of your videos and interviews, but I just really didn't feel that personal connection from the book. The final critique I have of this book is something that only the diehard fans of Ali's YouTube channel and interviews would notice while reading the book. So because I've watched so many of his videos where he promotes his book and also interviews with other creators about his book, I've noticed that he already explains a lot of the concepts covered in the book. I would say over 50% of them. So as I was reading through the book, it actually felt like a lot of the sections were super repetitive because I've heard him explain these ideas in depth in his shorts, long form videos, interviews, and it just didn't feel new to me, even though when I first watched those videos and heard about them, they felt new. So for example, things like the Wheel of Life, the 12-month celebrations, the Odyssey plan, different types of burnout, all of these things have been talked about in various videos and interviews where I feel like he pretty much like gave away most of the book. And now that I've covered the main tips and takeaways in this video as well, I feel like there's not many things that you might be able to gain from the book unless you're really into learning about research studies in which he derives these takeaways. So the big question is, should you buy this book? Well, I would say if you're more interested in just learning the tips and techniques to become a more productive person, then watching the videos on his channel and you watch this whole video, then I would say that there's not much more to glean from the book because I feel like between all these sources, it pretty much covers all the techniques that you need to know. However, if you're someone who is really into reading about research studies that lead to these productivity tips and hacks, then I would suggest buying the book because he does go into more detail about the specific studies that led to these discoveries of how to be more productive. So it's up to you whether you want to learn more about the research evidence behind these takeaways. All right, so that was a high-level summary of the book as well as my personal opinions on the value of the book. So if you guys like this video, let me know whether you'd be interested in me diving into specific sections of the book, whether it's explaining in more detail some of these different techniques or diving deeper into some of the books that back these techniques, such as Atomic Habits or Design Your Life. I also think it would be really cool to do some follow-up videos where I actually implement some of the experiments I talked about earlier in the video in my own personal life, especially when it comes to my own journey beginning as a creator on YouTube. And then you guys can see for yourself whether these changes actually help me make progress towards my goals through being more productive and feeling better about being productive. If you guys like this video, I think you'll also enjoy watching my other video where I talk about how we make our relationship with money more productive and meaningful for us, to make money serve us, not the other way around. So I highly encourage you guys to watch that, and please let me know your comments on that video as well. All right, with that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.